Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. On the program, we return to our all things Africa edition, our journey across the continent and looking at the history and current affairs of each nation. We last explored Congo, Zaire, DRC, and now we look at the history of Rwanda, the small nation that neighbors Congo, borders Uganda, and neighbors Burundi. And we've explored Rwanda a lot in past episodes with Yves Engler, Black Agenda Reports, and Garrison. But today, it's our returning champion, the brilliant historian and journalist and activist Abayomi Azikiwe of Pan-African Newswire, and also frequent contributor to Black Agenda Report, who will be our guide on this trip to Rwanda's history and current affairs. So, Abayomi, first off, welcome back to the program.
Well, thank you so much for your consistent following of these issues.
And thank you always for being our guide and coming back to explain to us all the different African countries. It's always an honor. And just before we get underway, as always, folks, please donate generously to Pan African Newswire and Black Agenda Report, and please donate generously if you can to One Plus One. Share all of our content, past and present, and help us overcome the far right algorithms and the corporate media. Help us overcome the monopoly Western corporate media and state media has in social media. So again, share widely One Plus One's content, and again, donate to us. And now to the topic at hand. So my first question, Abayomi, is talk to us about what was Rwanda like before German and Belgian colonialism, and then my follow-up question is what was Rwanda like when it was under German colonialism, and how did it later come after that to become a Belgian colony?
Well, thank you once again. And of course, Rwanda, the history of the country is closely linked with its neighbors. So prior to the intervention of Germany and then Belgium, they had their own culture. They had their own civilizations. There was a kingdom there, several kingdoms in the East Africa region, in Rwanda, in the DRC, and also in Burundi. So that is very important. A lot of the initial research that had been done indicated that many of the people prior to the development of agricultural production and the development of social classes were hunting and gathering societies, somewhat similar to the Twa. And of course, the Twa are also in Rwanda as well as in the DRC. And what happens is that once these kingdoms become stratified, then things change. For example, you have the development of monarchical systems, and you have that in Rwanda, where you have a king, his relatives, his family, who are largely dominant over the majority of the people within society. So this was the situation in Rwanda. You had kingdoms, you had hunting and gathering societies, and of course, this made them vulnerable as well as attractive to outside interests, particularly Germany during the period of the late 19th century when they were the host to this Berlin conference that sat down and attempted to decide how to divide up the African continent in the interests of Europe. So that's why you have a lot of the problems that developed after the 19th century, which did not exist prior to that time period. And a lot of it had to do with the divisions, the geographical reconfiguration of the region. And of course, this has been a problem even well into the 21st century. It's still going on today as we speak. So colonialism and imperialism is really at the root of a lot of the internal problems that exist today on the African continent.
And talk to us a bit more about what Rwanda. I believe it was known as. Actually, wait. Let me get my notes because I didn't. Yeah, let me get my notes on that because I believe Rwanda was known as. Oh, come on, where is it? Uh, it Rwanda and Burundi were one country. I believe it was known as Ruanda-Urundi or Ruanda-Urundi, and what was German colonialism like for pre-Rwanda back then, and then and then how did it come to be a Belgian colony, and what was Belgian colonialism like for the Rwandans and and also the Burundians when they were both one country under German colonialism and later Belgian colonialism?
There was a horrendous period of history during the late 19th century. I mentioned the Berlin Conference. And during the Berlin Conference, which was hosted by Germany, Otto von Bismarck, and he, of course, wanted to have as much of Africa as he could. The Germans were there, the French, the British, even the United States was present at this conference that took place in late 1884 and early 1885. Prior to that, there was the notion of colonizing East Africa as a unit. So you had the German East Africa Company, which was involved in agricultural production and the export of agriculture. But you need labor to carry out the colonial project. So what they did, they even brought Africans from other parts of the continent, and they tried to persuade various leaders, feudal leaders, leaders within the monarchical system that existed in that region of East Africa to sell land or allow them to use their land for the purpose of trade and also economic development. Of course, this was just a portrayal of the people there. Those that accepted the German East Africa project became enemies of their own people. And there were rebellions that developed during that particular time period, particularly during the late 1880s and early 1890s, the so-called Ashuri Rebellion. Now, initially, European historians tried to frame this rebellion in 1889 and 1890, 1891 as being an Arab revolt. In actuality, it was not. As we mentioned before, the people from Oman had traveled to East Africa, particularly in the Indian Ocean basin, and set up operations in Zanzibar, which is now part of the United Republic of Tanzania.
Yeah.
It is an island off the coast of the United Republic of Tanzania. And during that process, you had the Omani, so-called Arabs from West Asia, and you had indigenous Africans. Some were utilized as agricultural workers for the production of agricultural products that were exported outside of Zanzibar. There was also a slave trade that existed between Zanzibar and West Asia. Also, it's important to recognize that the interests of the Omani civilization and the so-called Swahili tribes and Swahili civilizations saw this as a threat. The advance of the German East Africa Company and later the German colonial structures. So there was a revolt against what the German colonialists were doing. And it was not just a so-called Arab revolt, it was a revolt of people from Oman as well as indigenous Africans from that region as well. Unfortunately, the Germans had superior weapons and they were able to inflict huge damage on the indigenous people in that area. So after that, you had the rise of German colonialism that was being administered from Berlin. This took place between about 1894 and 1918. It was a horrendous system. They were the ones that set up the stratification, class stratification between various groups, particularly the Hutu and the Tutsi nationalities.
Fascinating.
This was instituted during the German and Belgian colonial period. The Tutsi population in Rwanda in particular, which is a minority, were made the civil servants, the police. They were the favored group and they were pit against the Hutu majority. And the system was very brutal. It encouraged brutality on the part of the colonial authorities. The Germans, later the Belgians, and also their allies within the Tutsi community. So this created a lot of resentment among the Hutu against the Tutsi population. And this continued for decades, all the way into the period leading up to national independence, which took place in 1962.
Fascinating. And well, you sort of already answered my and did Belgium and did Rwanda, or what was known as Rwanda, did that become a colony to Belgium after Germany's loss in World War I? Then
Exactly.
okay,
That's what happened. That's what happened. They
okay,
had to turn
interesting.
over control of their colonies to Britain and Belgium. You had a situation in Rwanda as well as in Tanzania, well, Tanganyika, as it was called during that particular time period. And they were in Tanganyika, it was turned over to the British. In Rwanda and Burundi, it was turned over to the Belgians. And that dislocated German colonialism, pretty much destroyed it. And during World War One, of course, there was clashes between the various European imperialist powers for global hegemony, and there were all types of horrendous activities that took place beginning in the 1890s, all the way up through the period beginning around World War One. We talked about before the Maji Maji revolt that took place in Tanganyika between 1905 and 1907. There was also a war in Namibia in Southwest Africa between the Herero and the Herero people and also the other groups in the country. Two main groups in Namibia fought the Germans vociferously, Heinrich Witbooi and Maharero. And these two groups fought the Germans, but they were defeated because of the superior weapons that the Germans had at the time. And they were put into concentration camps. And it is estimated up to 80%, anywhere between 60 and 80% of the people in Namibia were exterminated during the period of the first decade of the 21st century. So the same situation happened in Tanganyika. And of course, there were revolts as well, as I mentioned before, in Rwanda and what was then known as German East Africa, where people rose up in the so-called Ashuri rebellion. In modern times, historians have looked at this, and now they view it as a revolt, an anti-colonial revolt. Prior to that, in order to try to distort the actual historical circumstances, it was labeled as a Arab revolt against German colonial rule. But in actuality, it was an anti-colonial revolt against German rule prior to World War One. Now, after World War One, of course, you had the Paris peace talks,
Yeah.
and the outcome of that. Woodrow Wilson, who was the president of the United States, traveled to Paris during that time period and played a very negative and reactionary role in the whole post-World War One process. They said he contracted the so-called Spanish flu, but actually it wasn't Spanish flu. It was first noted here in the United States during the war, but it was labeled as a Spanish flu, ostensibly because it was in Spain that they first started writing articles and publicizing them about the pandemic. But what's significant about that whole period was during the first phase, the first outbreak of the so-called Spanish flu, it was suppressed. News about it was suppressed in the United States because they felt it would interfere with the war effort. And the U.S., of course, got involved late anyway in World War One. They didn't intervene militarily until 1917. And a lot of fighting had already been done by that time. Similar situation happened during World War II in relationship to Europe. So, yes, after the war, when you had the trusteeship of Rwanda and Burundi that was mandated first by the League of Nations and then by the United Nations, what happened was that it was a de facto colonial system. Nothing changed fundamentally. The ethnic divisions inside the country were reinforced. And this continued up until the late 1950s, when there was a rebellion in Rwanda against the Tutsi hierarchy, who were allied with the Belgian colonialists. So
And was
this,
that and is that what was known as the Hutu Revolution yeah, is that was what was known as the Hutu Revolution in Rwanda when the Hutus yeah, basically overthrew what they felt was a Tutsi minority supremacy, and they overthrew yeah, and they overthrew
mhm.
that. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. During that period, of course, all over Africa, people were fighting for national independence, whether it was in Ghana, whether it was in Nigeria, places like Kenya, for example. They had the so-called Mau Mau Rebellion, the Kenyan Land and Freedom Army. So throughout the continent, people were rising up and demanding an end to colonialism. So a similar situation took place in Rwanda in 1959, but unfortunately it had an ethnic slant to it. The Tutsi population was viewed as being collaborators with the Belgians, and a lot of the majority of the population was Hutu, and they wanted to overthrow the not only the Belgian colonialists, but also the people who were collaborating with the Belgians among the Tutsi population. The country gained its independence in 1962, but it continued. These outbreaks of violence, internecine ethnic conflict continued throughout the 1960s and the 1970s. And of course, we know what happened in 1994. But prior to 1994, in 1990, we had the launching of the Rwandan Patriotic Front, uh, their military forces, which were fighting against the government of President Habyarimana of Rwanda, who was later killed in 1994 in the gunning down of a plane.
And the
But
RPF
this,
and the RPF was led by
Paul
Tutsi
Kagame.
yeah, Paul Kagame and Tutsi exiles who were living in Uganda since the Hutu revolution of the 1950s. Am I correct?
Exactly. Yeah, a lot of them did flee, uh, to other countries in the region, even abroad. People fled even here in the United States. So yes, this was what happened. And unfortunately, the internal struggle, became dominant in many ways. Through the internecine conflict, thousands and thousands of people were massacred in these conflicts. And it's a very unfortunate situation. And even today, it still has not been fully resolved. We're talking about the third decade of the 21st century, and we still are having problems between Rwanda and Burundi, between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. So yes, and even now between Rwanda and Uganda, there has been a split between the two governments. I think I mentioned before that Paul Kagame had been a part of Youri Museveni's National Resistance Army.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so they were very close in that regard. So unfortunately, this problem is still going on today as we speak in East Africa.
Then I want you to help us clarify something. Then, so now talk to us a bit more about Rwanda before it was Rwanda and its connections with Burundi, which we'll devote an entire episode on Burundi next week. But because Rwanda is one of those countries in Africa where you can't talk about its history or current affairs without mentioning Burundi. Certainly,
Yes.
certainly Congo and Uganda. Just like Ethiopia, you can't talk about Ethiopia without talking about Eritrea. You can't talk about Ethiopia without talking about Somalia, and Somalia without talking about Somalians. So do tell us what was Rwanda and Urundi, and why did it become two separate countries upon independence, known as Rwanda and Burundi?
Yes, unfortunately, you have an ethnic composition of a majority uh, Hutu population in Rwanda.
Yeah.
In Burundi, it's just the opposite.
Okay.
So you've had these resurgence or the recrudescence of conflict between the two major ethnic groups in the country. And in recent years, internally, there hasn't been as much conflict. Yet underneath this, the tensions still remain. And the reason why in Burundi, for example, that they had a civil war as well during the early 1990s, just like they had in neighboring Rwanda. In 1990, the RPF was formed, and they were fighting against the Habyarimana government in Rwanda, and that came to a head in April of 1994, and that's when another round of genocide was enacted against the Tutsi population. And it's estimated that possibly 800,000 people were killed, not only Tutsis, but also Hutus who refused to go along with the genocidal policies of the then Rwandan government. And then there was the militias, the Interahamwe militias, who also carried out massacres against the Tutsi population. So they used the media, they used the press to generate hostility towards the Tutsi population, and many of them were killed during 1994. However, by mid-1994, the RPF was able to take control of the country. And after that, a lot of adversaries, people who had worked or suspected of working with the previous Rwandan government under Habyarimana, were jailed. And for years, a lot of them fled the country. They went to Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, but a lot of them were imprisoned and put in prison, and some of them died as a result of that type of persecution. So
And
the
would you
situation.
and would you say that I'll certainly push back a little bit against against some of the claims of Paul Kagame. But that being
Yeah,
said,
right.
would you say that Paul Kagame and the Tutsis do have some legitimate grievances when it comes to them invading Rwanda? In response to, I guess this would be this would probably be several decades of the Hutu revolution in Rwanda, which you say there was some persecution of the Tutsi population. So they were victims. The Tutsis in Rwanda were victims of ethno-nationalism and ethno-supremacy of the Hutus, correct?
Yes, and so were the Hutus. I mean, they were all under the Belgian colonial system. Um, Nonetheless, you had Tutsis who were part of the administrative apparatus of Rwanda, and they were viewed as being privileged and being a part of the colonial apparatus. And those feelings continued even after 1962 when the country gained their independence. So, yeah, it's an unfortunate situation, but we've seen this happen in other parts of Africa as well, like in Nigeria, for example. What happened during the late 1960s, when the eastern and southern part of the country wanted to succeed from the central government.
Yeah.
They created Biafra, and of course, that was defeated by 1970. But a lot of people died during that war as well. So we see these patterns of ethno-political conflict, which were instituted in terms of history by the imperialists themselves, dividing the Hutus and the Tutsis just based upon facial characteristics, height. All of this was weaponized in a similar way as what was done in South Africa and Namibia and Zimbabwe and so forth, where you exacerbate small differences between people and use that as a mechanism for indirect rule. And that's what happened in Rwanda. You had
No, it sort of reminds me, the grievances of the Tutsis. It sort of reminds me, we've covered on 1+1 the very tragic history of Sri Lanka, where the Tamils were seen as this privileged racial class of people in Sri Lanka, which later the Sinhalese, the Buddhists, when they rightly, got, power and independence, later started to persecute the minority Tamil population, to the point where the Tamils believe, some of the Tamils believe that they should have their own country, and later
Mm-hmm.
driven into the arms of the
Mm-hmm.
ethno-nationalists, the Tamil Tigers. So, yeah, so it looks as if there's a similar dynamic going on in Rwanda when it comes to Paul Kagame and the Tutsis, correct?
Yeah. What's interesting is that in Sri Lanka, the Hindu minority, which is in part of the country, yeah, had to wage a war during the 1980s, all the way up until about 2010, when they were crushed, by the Sri Lankan government. Yeah, but what was interesting about Sri Lanka is that if you look at the actual name of Sri Lanka, it has the word socialism in it.
Yes.
Of course, when they first started out as an independent state, uh, the leadership at that time was socialist oriented. In fact, the initial prime minister there was a close ally of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana. And they were part of the non-aligned movement and so forth. But things have changed over the years. Since they crushed the LTTE, the Liberation Tigers of Elam, Tamil Elam, they've had a lot of economic problems in Sri Lanka, and the country was pretty much bankrupt, and there was a huge uprising 3 years ago. And still today, even though the leader of the country is supposed to be a leftist, but they have a lot to overcome in terms of economic development inside of Sri Lanka. But back to Rwanda, after Kagame and the RPF took power in 1994, the U.S. began to funnel aid and assistance to Rwanda. Now, I believe you mentioned this before, when Bill Clinton was president in 1994, during the genocide, the U.S. government refused to characterize what was going on in Rwanda between April and July of 1994 as a genocide. They refused. They absolutely refused to do that. And then, of course, after they got all the criticism, then they said, well, maybe we can utilize this new government for our own benefit. And that started to happen. They started funding aid in their weapons, military training, and so forth. So that led to the alliance between the U.S., Rwanda, and Uganda in various conflicts that developed, particularly in the neighboring Democratic Republic of Congo. We saw that in 1998. But prior to 1998, in 1997, when Laurent Kabila's Alliance for Democratic Alliance for Change in the then Zaire, they were backed by Rwanda and by Uganda. And that's how they were able to overthrow. And there were some other countries too that backed them, for example, Angola. But that's why they were able to overthrow Mobutu Sese Seko in May of 1997, which was popular at the time. People wanted to see Mobutu go, but they did not necessarily. There was divisions over Kabila as a political leader, and also the role of Rwanda and Uganda during the initial phase of the Kabila's government. Then, of course, the next year, they fell out, and they attempted to form another group called the RCD, the so-called Congolese Democratic Rally, which even some so-called leftists were a part of. They were backed by Rwanda and Uganda, and they invaded the country with the intent of overthrowing Kabila's government. Nonetheless, the Southern African Development Community under Zimbabwe, they were head of the military portfolio in 1998. They said, no way can we allow the Kabila government to be overthrown by Rwanda and Uganda. And then you had Namibia at that time under Sam Nujoma, sent their military forces, and Angola under Jose Eduardo dos Santos. And later, Burundi intervened on the side of the Southern African Development Community. They were able to stop the intervention and stop the takeover of the government. They were able to negotiate a solution. But this was after Laurent Kabila was assassinated in 2001. The actual agreement occurred in 2003 under Joseph Kabila, the son of Laurent Kabila. So, but there's still been problems over the last 2 decades between Rwanda and the DRC. So we can talk about that as well a little later.
Definitely. In fact, let's actually rewind a bit and go back into post-independence Rwanda, which is which is this. So, talk to us about the legacy of the first two Rwandan presidents and prime ministers, and that is Dominique Mubuyonso Mutwa. Sorry if I'm butchering his name, and Grigor uh, Kayibanda of the Parme of the Parme Hutu Republican Democratic Movement or Hutu Emancipation's Movement Party. What was the good, if there was any good, the bad, and the ugly of their legacy? And I should just say that the Parme Huntu party's political philosophy, and on the spectrum, according to Wikipedia, describes it as anti-monarchism, so of course anti, Belgian rule, anti-communism, and Hutu power. And it says that their political position is far right. So talk to us about those first two leaders.
Well, when you say anti-monarchy, that also includes the Tutsi monarchy, which some were collaborating with the Belgian colonialists and even the German colonialists. Not all, but some. So in that sense, it has to be viewed in that particular regard. But yes, I think that's a decent characterization. It was not a progressive or revolutionary government prior to the period that the RPF took over. And it was closely aligned with Western imperialism, Belgium, as well as France later on. So yes, it was not a progressive government. And these attacks on the Tutsi population periodically continued, where people were being killed in mass. So yes, people were ready for a change. And I think that the anti-communism was a byproduct of their alliance with the Western imperialist countries. We saw the same thing in Congo under Mobutu, for example. Staunch anti-communists. The US, the previous federal Germany, all those countries backed Mobutu to the hilt, and they sent him weapons. They even sent mercenaries to help anytime there was rebellion in the country. So we had a similar situation in Rwanda as well. It was closely allied with the Western imperialist system.
And then talk to us about the legacy of, I'm probably going to butcher his name, but so talk to us about the legacy of Juvenal
Habyarimana, yeah.
Habyarimana. Sorry if I'm butchering his name.
Well, we don't
who's
speak we
who's
don't speak
political.
Kirundi, yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah,
who's
yeah, it's
political.
highly repressive
Yeah,
government, and when you have a situation like that, it fuels uh, discontent. You had the Ugandan government, of course, which backed the RPF and helped train their guerrillas, and they were able to establish a base inside the country, and this caused panic among the Rwandan government during the early 1990s. They were making inroads into overthrowing the system there. And eventually you had an outbreak of another full-blown genocide, the worst since the late 1950s. So yes, Habyarimana was not a progressive leader. And eventually he went down in a plane crash in early April of 1994. He was killed along with the president at that time of Burundi as well. So it was really a tragedy, but it actually set off the mass killings that took place inside the country. But we also have to remember that the United Nations had a peacekeeping force in Rwanda at the time. And there's been allegations ever since, so talking about 31 years, that perhaps France was involved in the downing of that aircraft that killed people. Some people say it was the RPF, others say it was France. The RPF said it was France. So I think there needs to be further research into that. But both countries have their own ideas about what set off the genocide during mid 1994.
And it's interesting when one talks about the legacy of Juvenal Habyarimana, whose political party was similar to that of Mr. Dominique and Mr. Grigor uh, Kayibanda. He abolishes the post of prime minister and leads the National Revolutionary Movement for Development, or MRND, and makes Rwanda into a one-party state. And his party continues a far-right trajectory, continues Hutu power or Hutu supremacy, very socially conservative or socially regressive, as I like to say, very anti-communism. And I like this on Wikipedia. It says that his party were adherents of tropical fascism. And so I'm going to
I
take
wonder who made that characterization. It could have been the Rwandans. I don't know. Maybe it is.
exactly. I mean, I've heard of fascism, but tropical fascism. I guess it's because they're
Pretty interesting.
African or something that they feel the need to add tropical to that.
Yes, just a little south of the equator, and yeah, why not?
So, I believe you already said this, but I'm going to take a wild guess to say that for Belgium, Canada, Britain, Israel, the US, Australia, New Zealand, and France, this was the perfect African leader they could ask for, given his far right positions, his anti communism. Mobutu in neighboring Congo apparently was quite friendly with his regime, and given their kindred spirit of tropical fascism and favoring one tribe at the expense of the other, and their anti-leftism. I'm guessing that Hobby Armanda, up until his mysterious murder, that he was that the West propped him up, and and had very good relations with Mobutu of Zaire, later Congo, correct?
Yeah, yeah, and France had good relations with the then Rwandan government, and that's why even today there still is a strain in relations between France and Kigali because they blame
Exactly.
the French, for collaborating or either initiating the genocide that took place in 1994, and they've also accused France of harboring the so-called Hutu extremists in France, and that has caused problems with the DRC as well, because the Interahamwe, which was the name given to the militia there, after the RPF took over, they fled. A lot of them fled to the eastern DRC. And of course, they have been accused by the Rwandan government in particular of still training and still operating in efforts to come back into Rwanda and try to take power once again. I don't see that happening right now, unless there's some huge crisis inside the Rwandan political system. Rwanda today seems to be a pretty stable state because they have been allied with the West. Also, they've set up a program with the United Nations to take migrants, people who are displaced, into Rwanda. They had an agreement just recently with the British government.
Yeah.
And that was struck down by the European Union courts. And there were a lot of people inside of Britain, too.
And even the High Court in Britain, yeah.
Yes. And this was under the Conservative Party, that this plan where they were going to send migrants who had settled in the UK to ship them to Rwanda. And the Rwandan government had agreed to take these people in exchange for monetary compensation. So this is a very controversial project, and but it did not succeed at all.
And now, talk to us more about the rise of Paul Kagame and his Rwandan Patriotic Front. Explain us his tribal background, and then what happened between him and Habyarimana. What was going on between Rwanda and Burundi when the RPF, with the secret backing of the West, but open backing of Uganda, actually invaded Uganda? And from there, and from there, we'll talk about the most controversial parts of the conversation, which is the Rwandan genocide. And my only follow up question is also do explain what the official story is, if there's any issues you take with it, and then I'll give my perspective into that as well.
Yeah, there was a war, and of course, due to the internecine conflict since the late 1950s, many people from the Tutsi nationality fled to neighboring countries, and then they regrouped and they developed this Rwandan Patriotic Army, or the Rwandan Patriotic Front. And they began to level attacks against the Habyarimana government in Rwanda, and that caused panic. But at the same time, we have to look at the fact that after the RPF took over, uh, they were, of course, approached by the U.S. and other Western countries as allies. And being in the situation they were in, it's not surprising that they would accept. Nonetheless, it really became a problem, particularly in the late 1990s and early 2000s. As I mentioned, the situation in the DRC, where they had backed the intervention, and that had to be settled through warfare and negotiations. So yes, that was a major, major issue in the development of the genocide in 1994. And then, of course, that led to the overthrow of Mobutu, and then the falling out between the AFDL and, of course, the governments in Uganda and Rwanda, and then the war between the DRC and the SADC against the Rwanda and Uganda. But hopefully, these situations can be resolved diplomatically. But what has happened, though, just since last year, where the M23 rebel group, which is said to be backed by Rwanda, intervened again, well armed, well organized. They took over North Kivu, the capital there, and then also South Kivu. So they control both of those eastern provinces right now. The SADC had some soldiers killed. Most of them were from South Africa, but some were from Malawi. They decided to withdraw their military peacekeeping forces from the area. The United Nations also had peacekeeping forces in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The people there did not like them very much. They said they weren't doing anything to protect the masses from the rebel groups. So there were protests against the United Nations, UNESCO, United Nations mission in Congo. So it's still a very, very unstable situation that's taking place in the eastern DRC. But there's negotiations did occur between Felix Tshisekedi and Paul Kagame's government. And interestingly enough, who jumped in between? Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State, has been meeting with the foreign ministries of Rwanda and Uganda, Rwanda and the DRC, excuse me, and they have been trying to work out some type of peace deal in exchange for U.S. security in the area, which would facilitate the extraction of critical minerals. It's a very, very, very convoluted project. And as I said on the program before, I don't think this is going to resolve the internal conflict in the eastern DRC or the conflict between the DRC and Rwanda. I don't believe it's going to solve the problem at all. We've seen in the past the role of U.S. and Western intervention in the DRC. So this is being carried out again. And what's so bizarre about the whole situation is that Donald Trump said recently in a press conference, he didn't know what the Congo was. This is what he actually said. Like he said, he didn't know, nobody heard of Lesotho. Yet he has his Secretary of State meeting with the foreign ministry of the DRC and Rwanda to work out some type of peace deal in exchange for critical minerals and U.S. Security guarantees. It's a recipe for disaster, in my humble opinion. I think they should try to resolve their problems between themselves and leave the United States and the Western imperialist countries out of it. Because in the long run, and perhaps even in the short run, you could wind up with another open military conflict in that part of Africa.
Before I ask you, how do you assess Paul Kagame's leadership since coming to power in Congo? So I'm curious what you think of this. I don't know why it's well. Some call it controversial. I prefer to call it controversial. But what do you think of this new narrative that's been coming out within recent? I wouldn't even say recent years. I would say recent decades regarding what happened in Rwanda, which was the following. So, the official story of Rwanda and Paul Kagame's rise to power is that yes, he did come from a people that was certainly oppressed and marginalized and does have legitimate grievances which should be addressed, but that he himself is a reverse ethno nationalist. And with the backing of the West, certainly with the backing of Uganda, invaded Rwanda and basically invaded Rwanda. So he is guilty of violating supreme international crime of launching aggressive war. Then that being said, there's a frail piece between him and Habyarima, who is trying to also, deal with the situation along with the president of Burundi, and we are going to cover Burundi next week. And then, of course, their plane was was shot down, and Hutu extremists blame the Tutsis for that. Certainly blame blame the Tutsis for that, and then they later go on a genocidal rampage. Now, new evidence is starting to, and of course, Paul Kagame is the knight. He saves the day. He later, overthrows Hutu supremacy. Him and the Tutsis get into power, and everybody's has been living happily ever after in Rwanda since then. So that's the official story. The controversial story, the people who are against that narrative, including the late Glenn Ford, the late Bruce Dixon, the late Edward S. Herman, and other people like Phil Taylor of the Taylor Report, Yves Engler, Robin Philpott, and Garrison, also a Black Agenda Report, say that no, it's a bit more complicated than that. This is what really happened. Yes, the Tutsis do have legitimate grievances, but Paul Kagame, with the backing of the West, invades Rwanda. Later, when the peace deal is sort of trying to make, he sabotages it. He's actually the one that shoots down, the plane carrying Habyarima. And what happens isn't just a Hutu genocidal rampage, but a huge breakdown law and order in which both ethno-nationalists, including his RPF, engage in a lot of slaughter. And apparently Judy Redver of the Globe and Mail, she's done a very good book about the RPF, sort of saying that they're equally to blame for what we call the Rwandan genocide. I would prefer to actually just call it the Rwandan slaughter because it's both Hutus and Tutsis on a mass scale that's being slaughtered. And if people want to call it a civil war, I actually don't mind people even calling it that. And then later he uses that pretext of folks fleeing into Congo to launch even more bloody aggression into Congo. But what he's really doing in Congo is basically being a Western proxy and a Ugandan proxy to loot the Congo's minerals to make him and his small elite in Rwanda, which he controls now, richer and richer. I'm curious your assessment of what of all I've just said.
Yeah, I agree that it's not a simple explanation. That it's a more a nuanced explanation. The RPF, of course, has its own problems. They have become a de facto one-party state in Rwanda. It's very difficult for anybody to challenge Paul Kagame on an electoral basis. The Constitution has been revised so that he can stay in office at least until the next decade. All right. And there were a lot of Hutu people who were, in fact, died in prisons. They were tortured there. So, yes, there are crimes that have been committed on both sides. And of course, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, as I mentioned earlier, did get a lot of support from the U.S. So yes, in that regard, both sides have problematic issues. And of course, the RPF has been championed in many ways for saving Rwanda from total and abysmal failure. And what has happened since he took over, there has been economic growth inside the country. And they have done other things too, like, for example, their gender policy in the government. They have the largest percentage of women in their parliament than any other country in the world. And they also have it mandated that they have to appoint women as ministers and other officials in the administrative apparatus of the country.
Interesting, interesting.
This coincides, though, with the AU as a whole. This was a policy that was adopted by the AU
And the
since it was
AU, you mean
formed.
the African Union?
Yes, the African Union. So you have 50-50 representation in regard to women and men in government. But most of the countries have not achieved that. And I think Rwanda has gone further than any other country in achieving the representation of women within government. Now, people can say, well, if it's a dictatorial regime, what difference does it make? If there are women who constitute 60, 70% of the parliament, and they have half of the seats within the administrative apparatus and the cabinet, that doesn't cover up or doesn't contradict the problems that Rwanda has as a nation state in terms of being a one-party government and at the same time having close ties with the West. So yeah, it's a complicated situation, and the fact that they're still backing the M23, which caused havoc in the eastern DRC, So yeah, all those problems are reality. It just shows the complexities of the contemporary politics on the African continent. Yeah.
And interestingly enough, the RPF apparently historically they were a left nationalist movement slash party and a socialist big tent party, but shockingly, since coming to power with the blessing of the West, they've governed advancing what's called economic liberalism, and we know exactly what that is.
Yeah,
That's the free
right.
markets. That's neoliberalism. So I'm curious. Yeah, I'm very curious your response to that.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. They have investments from the West. They have projects that they collaborate with the West. And the whole notion that they're willing to take people that the West does not want, and most of those people are Africans or people of color. Yeah, it is problematic. And you're creating an outlet for resolving the internal problems in the Western imperialist countries. Why are all these people fleeing Africa, West Asia, and other geopolitical regions? It's because of the role of imperialism in undermining and destabilizing and underdeveloping their nations. You can look at that situation in South America and Central America and Mexico.
Yeah.
Why are so many people fleeing to the United States? Because their agricultural systems have been destroyed. Also, the United States promotes itself as a haven for democracy and economic opportunity. So a lot of people want to come there because they see it as a resolution of their problems. The same thing with the UK. You have people who are migrants based in other European countries, Southern and Western European, Southern and Central European countries that cross the English Channel from Calais over to England, the UK, and they wanted to stop. And you've had the development of these right-wing movements in Europe as well as the UK. Look what's happening in Germany now with the Alternatives for Deutschland, the AfD.
Yeah.
In France, you have a neo-fascist party headed by Le Pen, who was just recently convicted of committing fraud and has been disqualified from running for president. Yet they are appealing that within the French legal system.
Exactly.
What's going on in other European countries? And here in the United States, of course, we have the MAGA Republicans who use migration as a central political issue. Um, and what's really underlining that is the fact they don't want the United States to become a majority minority country, which it is on track to do over the next 2.5 decades. By the mid 21st century, the African population, the population of people from Central and South America, Asia, and West Asia are going to be collectively will be a majority in the United States. They do not want that to happen. Not that these groups are united right now, but there's a framework for their unity. And we've seen that represented in many occasions. It hasn't consolidated. But if there is a unification of people of color and national oppressed groups in the United States, even on an electoral level, they can start electing their own candidates, which operate in their own interests. They can even elect a head of state.
Yeah.
So they don't want that to happen.
Exactly.
So they demonize people. Like, for example, people who are here legally in the United States have been picked up and deported.
Yeah.
Yesterday, I mentioned yesterday at May Day in Detroit, the sheet metal workers union showed up with a banner of Mr. Garcia, who was kidnapped by the United States government and sent to El Salvador, where he's being held right now. And the U.S. in court has admitted that it was a mistake, yet they said they cannot bring him back to the United States. A U.S. senator went down there. Some Congress people have gone down there, and they still, the U.S. government has still not ordered him to be repatriated back to the U.S. He was a legal permanent resident inside the United States. He was an apprentice in the sheet metal industry. So all of this is going on, but it all, in my opinion, centers around racism and national oppression. They think in racial terms that if the United States becomes, a majority people of color nation, it would be a threat, to the white population and particularly to those who are in the higher echelons of the economic system inside the United States. If those people unite, for example, and decide to become socialists or revolutionaries, even social democrats, for that matter, could create serious problems for the ruling class inside the United States. The same thing in Britain. You got right-wing movements there. You got the Reform UK, which just won a seat yesterday in a by-election. The whole Brexit campaign, in many ways, was sparked by migration. They said it was too many people of color, too many people from Africa, Asia, people from other countries that have majority people of color, and they want those people out. They want to stop them from coming in. And if they have a state like Rwanda, for example, is willing to take them in exchange for monetary resources and economic investment, they're willing to send them there. And there may have been discussions even between Rwanda and the Trump administration about sending people from this country who they deem to be illegal and sending them to Rwanda as well.
And that's actually a perfect segue to this question, which is, why has there been so little international outrage? Although international outrage has been growing over the years when it comes to Rwanda and its endless bloody aggression towards Congo, but why so little why so little international outrage over Paul Kagambi's endless bloody aggression of Congo was Zaire? I'm curious your response.
In 1998, and that period between 1998 and 2003, there was people who spoke out strongly against the alliance between Uganda, Rwanda, and the U.S. Who comes to mind is Alambe Brath. He's now joined the Ancestors, but he was based in New York City. He had a group called the Patrice Lumumba Coalition, which did a lot of African solidarity work during the 1980s in support of the ANC, SWAPO, and so forth. You also have the December 12th Coalition, December 12th Movement, which has been active in doing solidarity work for Zimbabwe and other countries. They were out on April 30th for the International Day of Solidarity with Burkina Faso. Yes, but in recent years, the conflict there, unfortunately, has been viewed as a internecine conflict between Africans themselves, between people of the same ethnic group or different ethnic groups on the border between Rwanda, Uganda, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. So that, in my opinion, is one reason why there's not been the outcry, even within the SADC region, which the DRC joined, after the war between 1998 and 2003, is now in the process of withdrawing its troops. And there was a report just this week that the Rwandan Patriotic Army was escorting SADC peacekeeping forces out of the eastern DRC. So it's really amazing. And also, what's important, we need to mention this too. In Mozambique, in northern Mozambique, there was an insurgency that developed because of the development of liquefied natural gas in that area by Exxon Corporation. And the project was put on hold a few years ago because of the fighting. This group that calls itself Al-Shabaab, it's like an Islamic insurgency group. It's not clear exactly who's supporting them. It could be Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, it could be the US, in order to block the development of liquefied natural gas in northern Mozambique and the Cabo Delgado province. The Rwandan Patriotic Front agreed to send in their soldiers to fight these Islamic rebels, and they did that. And they actually were able to make major headways in beating back these insurgent forces. So this makes the situation even more complex because if you have the Rwandan military that has supplied support to the government in Mozambique, which is part of the Southern African Development Community, then that could cause a softening of positions against Rwanda and what it's doing in the eastern DRC. The president of Angola, Lourenco, João Lourenco, did attempt to negotiate a settlement between Paul Kagame and Felix Tshisekedi. It didn't work initially, but the negotiations have continued. And obviously there's been some effort to bring about a peaceful resolution to the conflict in eastern DRC. Nonetheless, we have to see what the actual outcome of this is going to be. The fact that the Trump administration, which says it doesn't even know what Congo is, has its Secretary of State there trying to negotiate some bizarre agreement between Rwanda and the DRC in exchange for access to critical minerals, and also to place perhaps U.S. troops, if not U.S. troops, maybe some type of private military forces in there. The same people who are from Michigan, who started the mercenary group that fought in Iraq and other places, yes, Trump has thrown out the idea of creating a private military force in the country. So who knows? They may want to put private U.S. Trained and funded mercenaries to guard the mining sites in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, because they want those critical minerals. They are important in terms of lithium batteries and other resources that are critical to the world capitalist system. So we'll have to see what happens in this regard. Of course, we want peace.
But Breakthrough News, which has done a lot of great coverage on Congo and Rwanda, and they've had Kambali Musavali, I believe that's how you say his name, from Congo. He was a critic of Paul Kagame on the program many times, and they've described Rwanda under Paul Kagame as the Israel of Africa. And the reason why I say that is because isn't Paul Kagame's narrative that like Israel, he uses legitimate past victimhood in order to justify unspeakable crimes against humanity towards people who have had nothing to do with whatever legitimate grievances he has. Is that why so many people have is that why there has been so little international outcry over what Paul Kagame is doing in in Congo?
Yeah, I believe there is a relationship there between the Zionist narrative, perpetual victimhood as a justification for genocidal actions, and the position of the Rwandan government under Paul Kagame, which is unfortunate, but that is a narrative that has been articulated in the past, and it still lingers to this day. Yes, since they were victims of genocide 31 years ago, and there were episodic outbreaks of genocidal violence going back at least to the late 1950s, this somehow justifies one-party rule. It somehow justifies other atrocities, even the intervention in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. So I don't think it provides a justification because if you look at Africa as a whole, all of the various regions have been subjected to similar forms of exploitation, oppression, and genocidal policies. DRC is a great example. Togo, which was also at one point colonized by Germany, underwent similar circumstances. Cameroon, Namibia, we could talk about Tanganyika.
Exactly.
Ethiopia, which was invaded twice by Italian imperialists, first under the monarchy and then later under the fascist Mussolini in 1935. So no, we cannot use these premises to justify an alliance with Zionism and at the same time aggressive military activity across borders, the borders which are recognized by the African Union and the United Nations.
Exactly. And it seems as if much of Rwanda's opposition to it seems as if much of Rwanda's supposed opposition to the RPF have actually been enablers to Paul Kagame's terrorism abroad and repression at home. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that is? Before I ask my follow-up question.
Yeah, they have hunted down people who are considered suspects related to the genocide. They've attacked governments, for example, France, from harboring these people, as well as Belgium. So yes, I think that's the situation that they're facing right now. Similar to how the Israelis for years and groups that were aligned with Israel were supposedly tracking down those people who collaborated with the Nazis, who were part of the German military during the Third Reich. So it's a similar project in that regard.
And the opposition, much of it, who don't even hold many seats of power in Rwanda's parliament, are the following. There's the Democratic Green Party, which is associated with the Global Greens internationally, and in Africa, the Federation of Green Parties in Africa. They are left-leaning, but foolishly believe in green liberalism and liberal democracy, so very much black capitalism, but of the liberal spectrum and green capitalism. The Liberal Party of Rwanda, more or less the same. The opposition makes up of the Social Democratic Party of Rwanda, the Social Party Imberakuri, and the Rwandan Socialist Party. Sadly, all have been supportive to Paul Kagame, either propping him up in power, not challenging him, on his lies that he's an ethno-nationalist and the true Rwandan genocidaire, and not challenging him on the crime of aggression towards Congo. So I'm curious what you think about that, and I'm curious your assessment of Rwanda's supposed opposition.
Yeah, I'm thinking that they would not be able to operate if they did not give some type of tactical support to the RPF government. Otherwise, they would be considered enemies of the state and of the ruling party, and that would be banned. So that is probably the reason why they do not come out strongly and criticize the central government in Rwanda. Now, if the situation changes inside of Rwanda, for example, if the economy goes into a tailspin, if there are divisions within the RPF, which can weaken the party and the state, you may see these parties take a different position, or there may be other parties that can come to the surface and try to make a bid for power in Rwanda. As of now, I don't see that happening in the immediate future, but things can change, and they can change rapidly, particularly now with the precarious economic situation that exists internationally in terms of the tariffs that Trump is imposing and the ongoing war in Ukraine. Even though they claim they've signed some mineral deal between the United States and Ukraine, there's no guarantee that's going to hold, and there's no guarantee that is going to bring about a succession of hostilities between the Russian Federation and Kiev. And it's the same situation in East Africa. We're hoping that Rwanda and the DRC can work out their disagreements. But what if they cannot? And what if the situation that Marco Rubio is negotiating on behalf of Donald Trump, even though he claims he knows nothing about it, if that fails, if it does not bring about a succession of hostilities, and it does not bring about the end of rebel activities in the East. So I don't see it as being a guarantee that these proposals, these negotiations are going to reach fruition, even though they should, but it has to be based upon a program of development for the Congolese people, for the Rwandan and Ugandan and Burundian people. That's what's important.
It's interesting. And it's also interesting. WikiLeaks revealed some years ago that Paul Kagame actually has a hit list, and he actually sends Rwandan secret services to anybody who blows the whistle on his complicity of who gunned down Habyarimana's planes, anyone who blows the whistles on his oppression, anyone who even blows the whistles on his complicity, which challenges his official story of the Rwandan genocide, he actually sends out to assassinate. And then and of course, like you said, anybody in Rwanda which even challenges that narrative is accused of being a genocide denialist and instead thrown in prison. So what's your assessment of the true big tent left-wing alternative to the RPF, which is the United Democratic Forces of Rwanda, led by the 2 to 3-time jailed leader Victoria Ingabire Muhoza? I think that's how you say her name. This is the true left alternative that believes in secularism, grassroots democracy, eco-politics, and more eco-left-leaning policies for Rwanda, as well as anti-racism, anti-fascism, anti-authoritarianism, and certainly for decentralization and anti-Kagame. What's your assessment of that?
Well, I would think they're not operating openly, or at least widely inside the country. They probably are operating externally.
Yeah.
And if they are operating internally, there's probably underground. And that would limit their capacity to really mobilize and organize people. But if there's a deterioration in the situation in Rwanda, it could be an opening for left-wing parties or coalitions or united fronts to have more influence over Rwandan society. But it depends on how things go inside the country itself.
And this is something I also wanted to ask you when I was doing the research on Rwandan history. I wanted to ask you if you could comment on how even when African countries are led by fairly far right and Western friendly leaderships like Mobutu, Idi Amin, Jovenel Habyarimana of Rwanda in Africa, or the Shah, Saddam Hussein, or Hosni Mubarak in West Asia or North Africa, the West is just ready to do such epic acts of betrayal on even leaders who advance Western interests. So I'm curious your thoughts on that when we talk about when we talk about when we talk about that imperialism in the context of Rwanda.
Yes, if these puppet leaders become a liability to Western imperialism, they will make moves to remove them. So that's it, pure and simple. They'll do that We've seen it happen in other parts of Africa, or if they are removed, they will not do a lot to try to have them reimposed. And even if they do, it may not be successful. If we look at the situation that has taken place, for example, in Niger, where they had a leader that was closely allied with the West. He was ostensibly elected, Bazoum. And what happened was that he was overthrown. And today, the CNSP government is there. They've asked the French to leave. They dismantled the U.S. drone stations. Yet, at the same time, they have not intervened militarily to reimpose him. But there are plots that are going on in all of those countries, the AES countries, whether it's Burkina Faso, Niger, or Mali. There are always efforts to undermine exactly what they're doing. For example, the AES initially signed the Liptako-Goma Charter, which was designed to work towards economic integration between these three former French colonies in the Sahel, all of which are landlocked. So yes, this is what's happening, and I believe that a similar situation could happen in Rwanda, Uganda, and even in the DRC. If these governments become liabilities to the West, or if they take positions that contradict Western foreign policy, they could easily be targeted for destabilization and regime change.
Interesting. And my second to last question is, do you think, apart from the anti-imperialist and pan-Africanist left movement pushing to hold Rwanda to account, do you think internationalist people concerned about the suffering of Congo and Rwanda being a proxy for Western imperialism, as well as Uganda, should lobby more of the BRICS nations, particularly China, to stop the unethical extraction of Congolese minerals while China and the other BRICS countries are trading with Rwanda, who is actually looting those minerals from Congo? I'm curious your response.
Yes, I don't see right now the DRC being requested or admitted to the BRICS Plus Summit. It could happen at a later date, but you have different social systems that are in operation inside of BRICS. For example, look at India, clearly a capitalist country. Even the government is pro-Israel there.
Yeah.
Yet they're part of BRICS, which also has South Africa, which is very much in solidarity with the Palestinians. China, for example, which is a socialist country that wants peace in Palestine, has attempted to bring together the various liberation movements and political parties in Palestine. Brazil, which has gone from a left-leaning social democratic administration, for example, under the current president who was in office before, who was impeached. And of course, well, he wasn't, Dilma Rousseff took over after him. She was impeached. And a right-wing government came to power and stayed in power for several years.
And he was
wrongly still remained in BRICS
during that time. Yeah.
So it still remained in BRICS. They've also invited Egypt, which is clearly allied with the West. They're part of it now, and Ethiopia as well, which has a better government, but at the same time has a lot of internal problems that are regional in orientation. So BRICS itself, even though it takes positions on a number of issues, is really not a political alliance. It's more of an economic alliance, which has political implications in the sense that Trump has said he's going to have draconian sanctions against all the BRIC states. And it's a threat because Dilma Rousseff, who was the former president of the Republic of Brazil, now heads the New Development Bank, whose aim is to provide sources of credit for developing countries outside of the framework of the International Monetary Fund and the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which is the World Bank. So they just had a meeting recently here in Washington, D.C. They're predicting low growth rates for the United States, for the entire imperialist world. Nonetheless, the New Development Bank, in order for it to be successful, it's going to have to wage a political struggle. Same thing with BRICS. against the imperialist countries. There could be splits around that
Exactly.
because the imperialists are not just going to sit idly by and watch another economic bloc formed that can challenge its hegemony in regard to domination of economic resources, mineral resources, and so forth.
Exactly. I mean, Trump is so committed to a unipolar world that he, of
Yes.
course, has threats into, make
Mm-hmm.
Canada the 51st state.
It's
So,
outrageous.
so,
But other countries have been subjected to the same type of threats, and other administrations. For example, Obama, he was pushing American exceptionalism. You know, when he first got in, he was given a Nobel Peace Prize. I don't know why he hadn't been in office but a few months. And
exactly.
in his acceptance speech, I guess they gave him to him because he was the first president openly of African descent, admitted he was of African descent. But what's interesting about Obama, when he gave that address at the acceptance of the Nobel Peace Prize, one of the first statements he made was that the United States has underwritten world security for the last 50 years. It was absurd.
And he was
What
making,
about Vietnam?
and he was also making all sorts of arguments about why America should be the police dog of the world and
Exactly.
why war should always be an option, which was bizarre to say. Yeah, which was bizarre to say the least.
Exactly. And yeah, he supported American exceptionalism to the hilt, that the United States had something special in terms of its foreign policy that distinguishes it from other countries in the world. And this is something good, and that their moral authority should hold sway over other geopolitical regions throughout the world. He was also a proponent of globalization, which is imperialism in a new framework, just a different definition of imperialism. In
Exactly.
2009, there was a summit held in Pittsburgh of the groups that are pushing for further globalization. And when they asked him that year on one of these Sunday morning news talk shows, he said, "What do you say to people who are opposed to globalization?" He said, quote, "They should get over it," unquote. Globalization is here to stay. So this is the type of mentality that has characterized the Obama administration, the first Trump administration, the Biden administration, and now the second Trump administration. They all believe in American exceptionalism. They all believe in U.S. imperialism. Some people, strangely enough, believe that Donald Trump would end military interventions in different parts of the world, when in fact the reality is he has enhanced global tensions with Canada, which Mark Carney is supposed to visit the United States next week after he won the elections earlier this week.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very contradictory and a very complicated situation that exists in the world today.
Here's hoping that anti-imperialist and pan-Africanist left movements do lobby more BRICS nations to
Take a more anti-imperialist position.
Yes, and to
As a
stop
bloc.
unethical extraction of Congolese minerals in what
Exactly.
is looting. My
Yeah.
final question is: any final thoughts on the liberation of Rwanda, Congo, and Uganda? What do you think it's going to take? And what more does the anti-imperialist, pan-Africanist, leftist movement need to do to truly help out Rwanda and this particular region of Africa and even the broader continent? I'm curious.
They need to study what is going on there. They need to talk about the atrocities that are being committed in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. They should demand a peace that is a just peace, that excludes the intervention of the U.S. and other imperialist countries. And they should push towards breaking down the borders which have divided that part of Africa. Those borders were instituted by imperialism, solidified through the Berlin Conference of 1884 and 1885, and further consolidated under neocolonialism during the post-independence period. So yes, all those things have to be done. And we need to move towards socialism because it's the only solution to the problem of underdevelopment on the African continent, that there has to be an equitable redistribution of resources, and there needs to be a policy that moves towards full integration, not only of Central and East Africa, but the entire African continent as a whole.
Yes, and I've been heartened to see in Canada, for example, the Congolese community there has been protesting more against what Rwanda is doing. In England, the Congolese community has been protesting more and more what Rwanda is doing to Congo. I believe there are certain movements, but on a much more smaller scale in both France and Belgium. But interestingly enough, the Belgian national team which has Romelu Lukaku, who's of Congolese descent, were protesting what were the Rwandan atrocities in Congo and doing the sort of protest signs which Congolese people themselves have been protesting not just the silence of the international community doing absolutely nothing, but being complicit in the suffering of Congo, but also have been demanding that sports and other, that sports facilities like FIFA stop promoting, Rwandan tourism and having these partnerships with Rwandan tourism, given what Rwanda is doing now. So I find that quite interesting as well. Actually, anything else you want to add before we close?
Well, just that people should continue to follow developments in that region of Africa between Rwanda and Congo, that they should oppose any U.S. Military intervention in the DRC on the border with Rwanda, because it could only lead to disaster. The character of imperialism has not changed fundamentally since the 1880s all the way up to the third decade in the 21st century. So people should be alert, they should be aware, and they should be in solidarity with the Congolese people themselves, that they themselves should take charge of the whole process of bringing about peace and normalization between the peoples of Congo and the peoples of Rwanda.
Fantastic. Well, we were joined on this. Well, that's a perfect place to end. Well, we were joined on this edition of One Plus One with Abayomi Azikiwe, journalist and historian of Pan African Newswire and Black Agenda Reports. Donate generously to both of those outlets, as well as One Plus One. And again, share widely all of One Plus One's content, past and present. To donate to us and join us next week in our journey across the African continent, where we'll be exploring Rwanda's nearby next door neighbor, Burundi. The journey continues. And also, folks, although although the day has passed, but have a great May Day, International Workers' Day weekend. Happy Victory Day in Vietnam and Reunification Day. That happened this week. All my best. Good night and good luck, and have a great weekend. And also, solidarity to the trans movement. There's been a lots of assault on the trans community and those in the 2S LGBTQIA community. Pride Month is coming up, so solidarity to them as well as the Palestinian people. Ciao until then.